the bridge of the human vessel. Retribution hummed with quiet efficiency, its crew moving through their duties with the practiced ease of veterans. Captain Sarah Chen stood before the main view screen, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace tear past their ship like liquid starlight. Her reflection stared back from the reinforced transparasteel, a woman in her 40s with calculating eyes and scars that told stories of survival in the galaxy's darker corners. "Captain," called Lieutenant Martinez from the communications station, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "We're picking up a distress signal. It's strange." Chen turned, her boots clicking against the metal deck plating. The sound echoed in the suddenly quiet bridge as every crew member paused their work. In the 3 years since humanity had joined the Galactic Federation, distress calls had become routine. Pirates, mechanical failures, navigation errors. The vast emptiness of space was full of dangers that could claim the unwary. "Strange how?" Chen asked, moving to stand behind Martinez's chair. The young officer's fingers danced across his console, isolating the signal. "It's not using standard Federation protocols. The encryption is primitive, almost ancient." "And Captain?" He looked up at her with troubled eyes. "It's not asking for rescue." "What do you mean?" Martinez's hands trembled slightly as he activated the translation matrix. "It's asking for what mercy." The bridge fell silent except for the low thrum of the ship's engines. Chen felt a familiar chill run down her spine, the same sensation she'd experienced during the border wars, when something was about to go very wrong. "Put it through," she ordered. The speakers crackled to life and an alien voice filled the bridge. The translation software rendered it in standard Terran, but couldn't mask the raw terror bleeding through every word. This is the Catherian research vessel, Whisper of Stars. We have made a terrible mistake. The Devourers have found us. They're here. They're feeding. Please, whoever receives this message, do not come. Do not try to help us. We have awakened something that should have stayed buried. The coordinates attached to this message, forget them. Forget we ever existed. The Devourers must not spread beyond this system. We die so that others might live. This is our final gift to the galaxy." The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge crew staring at each other in stunned silence. "Catherian?" asked Commander Jackson, Chen's second in command. His weathered face was creased with concern. "I've never heard of that species." "Neither have I," Chen admitted. She turned to her science officer, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a brilliant xenobiologist, who had joined the crew after the devastating loss of her research station to Vortak raiders. "Yuki, anything in the databases?" Dr. Tanaka's fingers flew across her console, searching through the Federation's extensive records. After several minutes, she looked up with a frown. "Nothing, Captain. No Catherian species registered with the Federation. No historical records, no first contact reports. It's as if they never existed." "But they're using our translation protocols," Martinez pointed out. "That means they've been monitoring Federation communications for years, maybe decades." Chen nodded slowly. A hidden species watching from the shadows. It wasn't unheard of. Many civilizations preferred to observe before making contact. But something about this felt different. The terror in that alien voice had been genuine, primal. Whatever these Devourers were, they had scared an entire starship crew to death. "What about those coordinates?" she asked. "System designation, NGC 7739, replied Navigation Officer Kim Park. Captain, it's in the Void Sector." The Void Sector. Chen suppressed a shudder. Even the name was ominous. It was a region of space avoided by most civilized species, filled with dead systems and stellar graveyards. Ships that ventured there rarely returned, and those that did brought back stories of ancient ruins and things that defied explanation. Distance? 18 hours at maximum hyperspace, Park answered. Chen weighed her options. The smart thing would be to report this to Federation Command and let them decide how to respond. The bureaucrats would form committees, file reports, and debate the issue for months while whatever was happening in that distant system continued unopened. But she couldn't forget the alien's final words. "We die so that others might live." Someone had chosen to sacrifice themselves to contain a threat. The least she could do was witness their sacrifice. "Set course for NGC 7739, she ordered. "Maximum hyperspace." "Captain," Jackson said quietly, moving closer to her. "Are you sure about this? That message was pretty clear. They don't want anyone coming." Chen looked at her old friend, remembering the battles they'd fought together, the crew members they'd lost, the impossible odds they'd overcome. "That's exactly why we need to go, Tom. If something in that system is dangerous enough to make an entire species choose extinction over escape, then we need to know what it is." As the Retribution altered course toward the Void sector, none of the crew noticed the small insectoid probe that had been shadowing them for the past 6 hours. It recorded their destination change and immediately transmitted the information across subspace to its masters. Deep in the darkness between stars, something ancient stirred and began to move. Chapter 2. Into the Void. The hyperspace tunnel collapsed. Around the Retribution, like a bursting soap bubble, depositing the human vessel at the edge of the NGC 7739 system. Captain Chen stood on her bridge, watching the main screen resolve into a view of normal space that made her stomach clench with unease. The system was wrong in ways that defied easy description. 3 suns burned in the center. One a healthy, yellow star, another a swollen red giant, and the third a sickly white dwarf that pulsed irregularly like a dying heart. Planets orbited in impossible configurations, their paths intersecting in ways that should have resulted in catastrophic collisions eons ago. "Sensor readings are inconsistent," Dr. Tanaka reported, her voice tight with confusion. "I'm detecting gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, and energy signatures that don't match any known phenomena." "Life signs?" Chen asked. "That's just it, Captain. The readings keep changing. One moment I detect massive biosignatures. On the 4th planet, the next there's nothing. It's as if reality itself is fluctuating." Lieutenant Martinez suddenly straightened at his station. "Captain, I'm picking up debris, lots of it, broadcasting on emergency frequencies." On screen, the view screen shifted to show a field of twisted metal and strange, organic-looking structures drifting through space. Chen had seen battlefields before, had witnessed the aftermath of fleet engagements, but this was different. The debris wasn't just destroyed, it was consumed. Metal beams ended in what looked like bite marks, and several pieces of wreckage were covered in a black tar-like substance that seemed to move on its own. "Those aren't human ships," observed Commander Jackson. "Or any Federation design I recognize," added Park. "The architecture is completely alien. Organic curves, crystal lattices. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time." Chen studied the wreckage more closely. There had been a battle here, but not the kind she was familiar with. This wasn't ship against ship, weapon against shield. This looked like something had simply fed. "Martinez, try to raise the Catherian vessel. If they're still alive, we need to make contact." The communications officer worked his console for several minutes before shaking his head. "Nothing, Captain. I'm not even detecting powered vessels in the system. Whatever happened here, it's over." Dr. Tanaka looked up from her station with wide eyes. "Captain, you need to see this. I've been analyzing the debris field, and I think I know what those ships were running from." The main screen changed to display a tactical plot of the system. Red dots marked the locations of destroyed vessels, hundreds of them, scattered across multiple orbital zones. "This wasn't a battle," Tanaka continued. "It was an evacuation. Look at the distribution pattern. All these ships were fleeing the inner system when they were caught. Something drove them out of their home worlds." "Drove them where?" Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Toward the system's edge. They were trying to escape into hyperspace when—" Tanaka gestured helplessly at the debris field. Chen felt pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. The Catherians hadn't been explorers or merchants who had stumbled into danger. They had been refugees, fleeing something that had already destroyed their civilization. And whatever they had awakened was still here, still hungry. "Captain, Martinez called out, his voice sharp with alarm. I'm detecting movement. Something big is rising from the fourth planet's atmosphere. The main screen shifted back to visual display, showing a world that looked like a diseased organ against the stars. As they watched, something began to emerge from the planet's sickly yellow clouds. It was massive beyond comprehension, easily the size of a Federation dreadnought, but nothing like any ship Chen had ever seen. The thing was alive. There was no other word for it. Its surface writhed with tentacles and mouths, and Chen could swear she saw eyes the size of fighter craft tracking their vessel. As it cleared the planetary atmosphere, more shapes began to follow. Dozens, then hundreds of similar creatures, each one a nightmare fusion of flesh and hunger. My God, whispered Jackson. What are those things? Dr. Tanaka's hands were shaking as she analyzed the sensor data. They're not using any technology I can identify. No engines, no power sources, no communications equipment. They're moving through space as if they were swimming through water. Biological ships? Chen suggested. Not ships, Captain. Those are the Devourers. They're spaceborne predators, and they're heading straight for us. As if summoned by her words, the lead creature opened what Chen now realized was a mouth large enough to swallow the Retribution whole. The sound it made was transmitted through space itself. A hunting cry that made the ship's hull vibrate and sent primal fear racing through every human on the bridge. Red alert, Chen ordered. All hands to battle stations. Prepare to engage. Captain, Jackson said urgently, there are hundreds of them. Maybe we should consider withdrawing to a safe distance and calling for reinforcements. Chen watched the approaching swarm of horrors and felt something cold and familiar settle in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd experienced during humanity's first contact with hostile aliens, when the Zephyrian Empire had tried to claim Earth as a breeding ground for their warrior caste. The galaxy was full of predators who saw humans as prey, who believed that because Earth's children came from a safe world, they would be easy victims. They always learned better, eventually. No, she said quietly. We're not running. These things consumed an entire civilization, Tom. If we retreat, they'll follow us back to Federation space. How many worlds will they devour while we're waiting? For the bureaucrats to approve a response? She turned to address her crew, and they could see something in her eyes that made them stand straighter. A glimpse of the predator that lurked beneath humanity's civilized surface. All hands, this is the captain. We've encountered a hostile force that has already destroyed at least one sapient species. These creatures are heading toward inhabited space, where they will undoubtedly continue their feeding. We are the only thing standing between them and billions of innocent lives. She paused, letting that sink in. I know what the regulations say about engaging unknown hostiles without authorization. I know what the smart play is supposed to be. But I also know that we took an oath to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Today, we honor that oath. Chen turned back to the view screen where the first wave of Devourers was closing to weapons range. Weapons free. Show them what happens when they threaten our neighbors. The Retribution might have been a single human vessel facing impossible odds, but as her weapon systems came online and her crew took their positions, the approaching swarm was about to learn why humanity had earned the right to walk among the stars. They were about to discover why Earth was classified as a death world and why its children never backed down from a fight. Chapter 3. The Wrath of Earth's Children. The first wave of Devourers struck the Retribution like a living tsunami of teeth and hunger. Captain Chen watched from her command chair as creatures the size of battleships swarmed around her vessel, their tentacles lashing against the shields in patterns that suggested intelligence far beyond mere animal cunning. Shields at 60%, reported Chief Engineer Rodriguez from his station. These things aren't using energy weapons. They're trying to physically tear through our hull. Particle beams, full spread, Chen ordered. Target the lead creature. The Retribution's main weapons discharged in brilliant streams of coherent energy, striking the nearest Devourer center mass. The creature's hide blackened and split, releasing clouds of vapor that might have been blood, but it barely slowed down. If anything, the injury seemed to enrage it. Minimal damage, Dr. Tanaka reported, studying her sensor readings with growing alarm. Their cellular structure is incredibly dense. It's like trying to cut through solid diamond with conventional weapons. A massive tentacle slammed into the ship's port side, and Chen felt the deck plates vibrate under her feet. Warning lights began flashing across the bridge as systems strained under the assault. These things learn fast, Jackson observed grimly. They're coordinating their attacks, focusing on weak points in our shield matrix. Chen watched the tactical display with growing concern. More devourers were rising from the planet's surface, and she could see that her ship's weapons were barely scratching their attackers. At this rate, they would be overwhelmed within minutes. But Captain Sarah Chen hadn't survived 3 wars and a dozen border conflicts by following standard tactics. She had earned her command by thinking outside the box, by finding ways to turn humanity's supposed weaknesses into deadly advantages. "Rodriguez," she called out. "What's our reactor output?" "Operating at standard levels, Captain." "Why?" "Take us to emergency power. Route everything except life support through the weapons systems." The engineer's eyes widened. "Captain, that will overload our particle beams." The weapons weren't designed to handle that kind of energy input. "I know," Chen replied calmly. "Martinez, send a message to Federation Command. Priority Alpha transmission." "What should I tell them?" Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that would have made the approaching devourers pause if they had been capable of recognizing danger. "Tell them the Retribution has encountered a hostile force in the NGC 7739 system. Tell them we are engaging according to Protocol 7. Jackson turned to stare at his captain. Protocol 7 hadn't been used since the Zephyrian War, and for good reason. It was humanity's most ruthless military doctrine, designed for situations where conventional tactics were insufficient and total victory was the only acceptable outcome. "Captain," he said quietly, "Protocol 7 authorizes the use of any and all means necessary to eliminate a threat. Are you sure?" "Tom," Chen interrupted, still watching the swarm of creatures surrounding their ship. "Look at them. Really look. They're not just predators. They're an extinction event. If even one of these things reaches inhabited space, it will breed and spread until entire sectors are consumed." She stood up from her command chair, and every person on the bridge could feel the change in her posture, the way she seemed to grow more dangerous with each passing second. Humanity spent millions of years clawing its way to the top of the food chain on a world that was actively trying to kill us. We survived ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless predators that were bigger, stronger, and faster than we were. Do you know how we did it? The bridge crew waited, transfixed by their captain's words. We didn't just kill our enemies, we made them extinct. We hunted them so efficiently, so ruthlessly that they ceased to exist. And when we ran out of natural predators to eliminate, we turned that same lethal focus on each other until we learned to channel it toward the stars. She gestured toward the view screen where dozens of devourers were now swarming around the ship. These things think they're apex predators. They've probably consumed countless species across the galaxy, growing fat and complacent on easy prey. But they've never encountered Deathworlders before. They've never faced a species that considers extinction warfare to be just another Tuesday. Chen turned to her weapons officer. "Lieutenant Park, arm all nuclear warheads. Set them for proximity detonation." "Captain," Park said hesitantly, "our nuclear arsenal is designed for planetary bombardment. If we detonate them at close range, the radiation will kill everything within a 10-kilometer radius," Chen finished, "including us, if we're not careful. That's why we're going to do something these creatures won't expect." She moved to the helm station, where Ensign Foster was struggling to maintain position against the creature's coordinated assault. "Foster, plot a course directly toward that planet. Maximum sublight." "Ma'am?" "We're going to ram them." The bridge fell silent except for the sound of alarms and the continuing impacts of devourer tentacles against the hull. Then Jackson stepped forward, and Chen could see the moment when he understood her plan. "A ramming attack will force them to cluster around us," he said slowly. "They'll try to stop our momentum by grabbing onto the hull. That will put dozens of them within the blast radius of our nuclear arsenal." "Exactly, and while they're focused on stopping us, they won't notice what we're really doing. Chen returned to her command chair and activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. In approximately 3 minutes, we are going to demonstrate why human beings are considered the most dangerous species in known space. Secure yourselves for emergency maneuvers and prepare for nuclear detonation. As the Retribution accelerated toward the planet's surface, more devourers converged on their position, drawn by what they perceived as a desperate escape attempt. Massive creatures wrapped themselves around the ship's hull, their tentacles seeking weak points in the armor plating. 50 creatures attached to our hull, reported Dr. Tanaka. 70, 90. Captain, there are over 100 of them trying to stop us. Perfect. Rodriguez, what's our reactor status? Emergency power achieved. Weapon systems are operating at 300% of rated capacity. Chen watched the tactical display as more devourers moved to intercept their trajectory. In their eagerness to stop what they thought was a fleeing prey animal, they had done exactly what she had hoped. They had clustered together in a perfect target formation. Nuclear warheads armed and ready, reported Park. The Retribution unleashed the full fury of human military engineering. Overcharged particle beams lanced out in all directions, carving through devourer flesh with energies that would have reduced a normal starship to vapor. Nuclear warheads detonated in brilliant flowers of destruction, their combined yield equivalent to several hundred megatons. But Chen wasn't done. As the initial wave of destruction cleared, she activated a system that few Federation species even knew existed on human vessels. Antimatter charges, full deployment. Captain, Jackson protested, those are planet crackers. If we use them here, we'll sterilize this entire system, Chen finished, which is exactly what needs to happen. As the first antimatter warhead detonated, space itself seemed to scream. Matter and antimatter annihilated each other in perfect efficiency, releasing energies that briefly outshone the system's 3 suns. The devourers caught in the blast simply ceased to exist, their constituent atoms torn apart and scattered across light years. One by one, the remaining antimatter charges found their targets. The creatures that had survived the nuclear bombardment were consumed by forces that made stellar fusion look tame by comparison. Within minutes, the swarm of hundreds had been reduced to scattered organic debris. But Chen wasn't finished. She turned to her science officer with eyes that held no mercy. Tanaka, scan that planet. I want to know if there are any more of these things down there. The xenobiologist worked her console with trembling hands. I'm detecting massive biosignatures. Thousands of them, Captain. Maybe tens of thousands. They're dormant, but if they wake up, they won't, Chen said simply. She turned to her weapons officer. Park, how many antimatter charges do we have left? 12, Captain. Target the planet's core. I want nothing left but asteroid rubble. As the Retribution prepared to commit genocide on a planetary scale, the last surviving devourer, a creature that had been feeding in the outer system when the battle began, watched from a safe distance. It had witnessed the impossible. A single small vessel from an unknown species had annihilated its entire brood in less than an hour. For the first time in its million-year existence, the creature felt something it had never experienced before. Fear. It turned and fled toward the galaxy's edge, carrying with it a terrible warning that would spread through the cosmic ecosystem like wildfire. There was a new apex predator in the galaxy, and it did not show mercy to those who threatened the innocent. Behind it, the planet that had birthed the devourer swarm cracked apart under the assault of human antimatter weapons, its destruction visible from neighboring star systems as a brief, brilliant nova. The Cytherians were avenged. The galaxy was safe, and humanity had once again proven why they were the most terrifying species to emerge from the cosmic dark. Chapter 4. The Price of Victory. The observation deck of the Retribution had become an impromptu memorial. Captain. Chen stood before the massive viewport, watching the expanding cloud of debris that had once been a planet. The antimatter bombardment had been thorough. Where NGC 77394 had once orbited, there was now only a glowing nebula of superheated gases and scattered asteroids. Dr. Yuki Tanaka joined her at the viewport, carrying 2 cups of coffee and moving with the careful gait of someone who had been through hell and back. The ship's medical bay was full of crew members suffering from radiation exposure and combat stress, but everyone was alive. Somehow, impossibly, they had all survived. "The debris field is clean," Tanaka reported, handing Chen one of the cups. "No biological signatures, no energy readings that would suggest surviving devourers. We got them all." Chen accepted the coffee gratefully, noting how her hands barely trembled as she raised it to her lips. 3 hours ago, she had ordered the annihilation of an entire species and the destruction of a world. She should feel something about that: guilt, regret, perhaps satisfaction. Instead, she felt only a hollow emptiness and the bone-deep weariness that came after an adrenaline crash. "Any word from Federation Command?" she asked. "Commander Jackson is still talking to them. From what I understand, there are some very heated discussions happening in the council chambers. Apparently, our use of antimatter weapons without authorization has caused quite a stir." Chen almost smiled. She could imagine the chaos in the Federation's pristine halls of government as bureaucrats tried to process what had happened. Humanity had been a member of the Galactic community for only 3 years, and they were still adapting to human military doctrine. The other species had grown comfortable with their sanitized, regulated conflicts. Wars fought with energy, weapons at long range, governed by rules of engagement that prioritized minimizing casualties and environmental damage. They had never encountered total war doctrine before. They had never seen what humans did when they decided something needed to stop existing. "Captain," called Lieutenant Martinez from behind them, "Commander Jackson wants to see you on the bridge. Priority communication from Admiral Reyes." Chen drained her coffee and handed the empty cup back to Tanaka. "Time to face the music, I suppose." The bridge was bustling with activity as repair. Crews worked to restore damaged systems, and communications officers fielded inquiries from across Federation space. Word of the engagement had spread quickly, and it seemed like every species in the galaxy wanted to know what had happened in the NGC 7739 system. Admiral Reyes appeared on the main screen as Chen took her place in the command chair. The Admiral was one of the few non-human officers in the Federation military hierarchy. A tall, elegant Altarian with crystalline features and eyes that could see across multiple spectrums of light. She had been one of humanity's strongest advocates during the integration process, but her expression now was carefully neutral. "Captain Chen," she began without preamble, "I've just finished explaining to the Federation Council why one of my ships decided to deploy weapons of mass destruction without authorization. Would you care to add anything to my report?" Chen straightened in her chair. "Admiral, we encountered a hostile force that had already consumed at least one sapient species and was preparing to expand into inhabited space. I made a tactical decision to eliminate the threat before it could spread." "A tactical decision," Admiral Reyes repeated slowly. "Captain, you destroyed an entire planet. The energy release from your antimatter bombardment was visible from 3 neighboring systems. Ships are being dispatched from across the sector to investigate what they assume was a stellar catastrophe." "Yes, ma'am." "And you did this to eliminate creatures that, according to your report, possessed no faster-than-light capability and were confined to a single star system?" Chen felt a flicker of irritation. "Admiral, with respect, these creatures were not confined to anything. They had already destroyed the Cytherian civilization, an entire spacefaring species that we never even knew existed. The survivors were fleeing toward Federation space when they were caught and consumed." She leaned forward, allowing some of the steel to show in her voice. "Ma'am, I've read the reports from our xenobiology teams. The galaxy is full of predator species that view other sapients as prey. The Zephyrians tried to use Earth as a breeding ground. The Vortak Empire enslaved entire species for food. The Kresh hegemony treats non-Kresh as experimental subjects. In every case, the Federation's response has been diplomatic protests and economic sanctions." Admiral Reyes's crystalline features remained impassive. "Those are sovereign species, with recognized territorial claims, Captain. The situation is complex." "The situation is simple," Chen replied flatly. "The galaxy is full of wolves, and the Federation spends its time debating whether wolves have the right to eat sheep. Well, Admiral, humanity comes from a world where we eliminated every predator that posed a threat to our species. We didn't negotiate with saber-toothed tigers or hold peace talks with cave bears. We made them extinct. The bridge had fallen silent. Chen could feel her crew's eyes on her as she continued. These devourers weren't a territorial dispute or a resource conflict. They were an extinction event. Every moment we delayed, every committee meeting and impact assessment we conducted, would have been paid for in the lives of innocent beings. So yes, I destroyed an entire planet to stop them, and I'd do it again. Admiral Reyes studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. The Council is furious, you know, she said. Half of them want you court-martialed for exceeding your authority. The other half want to classify the entire incident and pretend it never happened. They're terrified of what it means that a single human vessel could eliminate a threat that consumed an entire civilization. And what do you want, Admiral? Which brings us back to the NGC 7739 incident, Zexthul said. If the rumors are true, Captain Chen and her crew encountered something that had already consumed an entire spacefaring civilization. These devourers represented an existential threat to sapient life in the galaxy. And the humans' response was immediate total warfare, Ashworth added. No negotiation, no attempts at communication, no measured escalation. They identified a threat to innocent life and eliminated it with extreme prejudice. The three beings sat in contemplative silence as the implications sank in. Around them, the cantina's usual mix of traders, diplomats, and mercenaries continued their conversations, oblivious to the discussion of galactic-scale extinction events happening in their midst. There are other stories, Vorthak said eventually, whispers from the deep patrol fleets, tales that make their way through the smuggler networks. Ships that venture too far into the void sectors and encounter things that shouldn't exist, ancient predators, cosmic horrors, entities that consume entire star systems. The Federation prefers to classify such reports as equipment malfunctions or navigational errors, Zexthul noted. The Council finds it easier to maintain order if the member species don't know how many threats exist in the spaces between civilized systems. But the humans know, Ashworth said quietly. They've always known. Their entire evolutionary history prepared them for this. Millions of years of surviving on a world that was actively trying to kill them, learning to identify and eliminate threats before they could spread. They don't see monsters in the dark as anomalies to be studied or avoided. They see them as problems to be solved. As if summoned by their conversation, a figure approached their table from the cantina's shadows. It was another human, a woman in her 30s wearing the unmarked black uniform that had become associated with humanity's deep space operations. Her eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen things that existed beyond the edge of sanity. Dr. Ashworth, she said in a voice that was carefully controlled. I'm Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, attached to Special Operations Command. I believe you've been asking questions about classified incidents. Ashworth straightened, in his chair, suddenly aware that several other humans had quietly positioned themselves around the cantina. They weren't threatening exactly, but their presence was unmistakable. Commander Mitchell, he replied carefully. I'm simply a xenobiologist with an interest in predator-prey relationships across galactic ecosystems. Mitchell smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. And I'm just a procurement officer interested in your research findings. Perhaps we could discuss your work in a more private setting? It wasn't really a request. Ashworth looked at his companions, noting how Vorthak's scarred features had gone completely neutral, and Zexthul's prismatic eyes had shifted to a cautious amber. Both of them recognized the signs of apex predators asserting territorial control. That would be educational, Ashworth replied. Excellent. Gentlemen, Mitchell nodded to Vorthak and Zexthul. Thank you for keeping Dr. Ashworth company. I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining discretion regarding sensitive topics. The two aliens nodded quickly. As Mitchell escorted Ashworth away from the table, Vorthak turned to his Altarian companion. Did you notice how she never raised her voice or made any direct threats? Indeed, Yet every instinct I possess was screaming at me to avoid confrontation with her. It's remarkable how humans can project menace without any overt aggressive displays. It's because they don't need to bluff, Forthak observed. When you've actually eliminated entire species, you don't need to convince anyone of your lethality. They know what they're capable of, and more importantly, so does everyone else. Across the galaxy, in the deep spaces where ancient horrors stirred and cosmic predators hunted, the legend of humanity was growing. Stories spread through the smuggler networks and pirate fleets, whispered in the hidden corners of space stations and the dark corridors of generation ships. The humans had arrived in the galaxy as newcomers, curiosities from a backwater world that most species had never heard of. But in the 3 years since first contact, they had established themselves as something far more significant. They were the species that hunted hunters, the civilization that looked at extinction events and responded with controlled genocide. The Deathworlders who had turned evolutionary trauma into a survival tool so refined that entire predator species simply ceased to exist when they drew human attention. In the deepest parts of space, where things older than most star systems fed on the dreams of sleeping civilizations, new patterns were emerging. Ancient entities that had preyed upon sapient life for millions of years were beginning to avoid certain regions of the galaxy. Cosmic horrors that had consumed entire sectors were retreating to the spaces between galactic arms. For the first time since complex life had evolved in the Milky Way, the predators were becoming prey. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching her sensors track something that had been systematically eliminating colonies along the outer rim. Her crew moved with quiet efficiency around her, checking weapon systems and preparing for another encounter with the impossible. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported Lieutenant Martinez. "It's big, Captain, bigger than anything we've faced before." Chen smiled, and in that expression was the accumulated weight of humanity's violent evolution, millions of years, of survival on a world that had forged them into the galaxy's most efficient killers. "Then we'll just have to hit it harder," she said simply. Behind her, Commander Jackson began the familiar ritual of preparing for battle against cosmic horror. Around her, the best and brightest of Earth's children readied themselves to face another extinction event with nothing but human ingenuity, human weapons, and the absolute certainty that anything threatening innocent life would be made to stop existing. The galaxy had given birth to countless predator species over its billions of years of existence, but it had never produced anything quite like humanity. It had never created Deathworlders before. And in the vast, hostile universe where survival was a constant struggle against impossible odds that made all the difference, the hunt continued. End of story.